The parables of Jesus. Lessons on the kingdom and responsibility. The sun sets over the hills of Galilee, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Jesus sits with his disciples, their gaze resting on the peaceful lake. The evening air is mild, filled with the scent of olive trees. It's in this serene setting that Jesus is about to share new parables, stories that will challenge and inspire his listeners for centuries to come. Welcome to our third exploration of Jesus' parables. Today we'll dive into stories that speak to us about the nature of God's kingdom, our responsibility as disciples, and the urgency of responding to God's call. Jesus begins. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. Imagine the scene. 3 servants, each receiving a considerable sum of money. Talent was worth about 20 years of a worker's wages. The master trusts them, entrusting his wealth to them in his absence. Jesus continues by telling how the servants managed this money. The one who had received 5 bags of gold gained 5 more. The one who had received 2 bags gained 2 more. But the one who had received 1 bag dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. When the master returns, the first 2 servants are praised and rewarded. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. But the third servant, who did nothing with his talent, is severely reprimanded and punished. This parable teaches us several important lessons. God's trust. God entrusts us with talents, gifts, abilities, resources. It's a sign of his trust in us. Individual responsibility. Each receives according to his ability. God doesn't ask more of us than we can do, but he expects us to use what he has given us. The importance of action. It's not the quantity of talents that matters, but what we do with them. The servant with 2 talents is rewarded just as much as the one who had 5. The danger of inaction. The servant who did nothing with his talent is severely judged. The parable teaches us that doing nothing with our gifts is a form of unfaithfulness. The reward of faithfulness. Faithful servants are invited to share in their master's happiness. Faithfulness leads to greater responsibility and greater communion with God. This parable poses a powerful challenge. What are we doing with the talents God has entrusted to us? Are we using our gifts, our resources, our opportunities to advance God's kingdom? Or are we burying them out of fear, laziness, or indifference? In our modern context, this parable could apply in many ways. A professional using their skills to serve voluntarily in their community. A student developing their academic talents to become an effective witness in the academic world. An elderly person using their time and experience to mentor younger generations. The message is clear. God has endowed us all with talents, and he expects us to use them productively for his kingdom. Jesus continues with another parable. At that time the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. He describes 10 young women waiting for the bridegroom's arrival for a wedding. 5 of them are wise and have taken extra oil for their lamps. The other 5 are foolish and didn't think to bring any. The bridegroom is late in coming, and they all fall asleep. At midnight, a cry rings out. Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him. The virgins wake up and trim their lamps. The foolish ones, realizing they don't have enough oil, ask the wise ones to share. But they refuse, fearing they won't have enough for themselves. While the foolish virgins go to buy oil, the bridegroom arrives. The wise virgins enter with him into the wedding banquet. The door is shut. When the others return, it's too late. The bridegroom tells them, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you." Jesus concludes, "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." This parable teaches us several important truths. The importance of spiritual preparation. The wise virgins were ready for a long wait. Similarly, we must cultivate a faith that can endure, even when the Lord's return seems delayed. Personal responsibility. The wise virgins couldn't share their oil. This reminds us that some aspects of our faith are personal and can't be borrowed from others. The urgency of decision. Once the bridegroom arrived, it was too late to prepare. This parable underscores the importance of responding to God's call now, without waiting. The reality of exclusion. Foolish virgins are excluded from the feast. This reminds us that our choices have eternal consequences. This parable challenges us. Are we spiritually ready for Christ's return? Are we cultivating a faith that can endure waiting and difficulty? In our modern world, this parable could apply like this: the importance of regular spiritual discipline, prayer, Bible study, fellowship to keep our lamp lit, the need to cultivate a personal faith which doesn't rely solely on the experience or spirituality of others, urgency of responding to God's call in our life without postponing important decisions. Jesus then tells a parable about a great banquet. A certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. When the banquet is ready, the master sends his servant to tell the invited guests to come. But they all begin to make excuses. One says he has bought a field and must go see it. Another that he has bought oxen and must try them out. A third that he has just got married. Angry, the master tells his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, crippled, blind, and the lame. When this is done, there is still room." The master then says, "Go out to the roads and country lanes and compel them to come in so that my house will be full." This parable teaches us several important truths about God's kingdom. The generosity of the invitation. God invites widely to his banquet. Kingdom's invitation is open to all. People's excuses. Many reject the invitation for reasons that seem legitimate, actually reveal misplaced priority. The inclusion of the marginalized. Those who are generally excluded from society are specifically invited to God's feast. Urgency of the mission. The master insists that his house be filled, reminding us of the urgency of evangelization. This parable challenges us in several ways. Have we truly grasped the value of God's invitation, or are we letting other priorities distract us? Are we ready to welcome into the church those whom society rejects? Do we share God's urgency to reach those who haven't yet responded to the invitation? In our modern context, this parable could apply like this: a church that actively engages with the homeless, addicts, or other marginalized groups. Christians who prioritize their engagement in the church and God's service over the pursuit of professional success or material comfort. Community that strives to be welcoming and inclusive, reflecting the generosity of God's invitation. These parables, although different in their details, converge on common themes. The disciples' responsibility, whether in using our talents, in our spiritual preparation, or in our response to God's invitation, we are called to an active and engaged faith. Urgency of decision. These parables all emphasize the importance of responding to God's call now, without postponing. God's generosity. Whether it's entrusting us with his goods, inviting us to his wedding, or calling us to his feast, God shows himself incredibly generous towards us. The reality of judgment. These parables remind us that our choices have eternal consequences. There is a real possibility of being excluded from the kingdom if we don't respond correctly to God's call. How can we live out these parables in our daily reality? Identify and use your talent. Take time to reflect on the gifts God has entrusted to you. How can you use them more effectively for his kingdom? Cultivate your spiritual life. Like the wise virgins, make sure you have a spiritual oil reserve. Develop habits of prayer, Bible study, and fellowship that will nourish your faith in the long term. Prioritize God's kingdom. Examine your priorities in light of the parable of the great banquet. Are there fields, oxen, or marriages that are preventing you from fully responding to God's call? Adopt an attitude of inclusion. Think about how you can reflect the generosity of God's invitation in your life and in your church. How can you reach those who are generally excluded or neglected? Live with a sense of urgency. These parables remind us that time is limited. How can you live each day as if it were a precious opportunity to serve God and advance his kingdom? The parables we've explored today are not just stories to entertain or instruct us. They are powerful calls to an active, engaged, and urgent faith. They challenge us to reevaluate our priorities, deepen our commitment to God, and live each day in awareness of the imminence of the kingdom. As we conclude this exploration, I invite you to reflect. Which parable spoke to you the most today? What aspect of your life is most challenged by these teachings of Jesus? What concrete change will you make in your life in response to these parables? Remember, these stories are meant to be lived, not just heard. May the wisdom of these parables penetrate deeply into your heart and transform your life from the inside out. Dear friends, the parables we've explored today are just part of the rich treasure of teachings Jesus has left us. In our next and final video on parables, we'll dive into other equally profound and provocative stories. We'll discover the parable of the workers in the vineyard, which reveals God's surprising generosity. We'll explore the parable of the prodigal son, which shows us the Father's unconditional love. We'll meditate on the parable of the Good Samaritan, which radically redefines what it means to love our neighbor. These stories will continue to challenge our understanding of God, His kingdom, and our role as disciples. They will invite us to deepen our understanding of God's grace, broaden our vision of love, and live a faith that concretely transforms our world. Get ready to be surprised, challenged, and inspired once again by Jesus' wisdom. For His parables, though simple in appearance, contain treasures of truth that can transform our lives if we let them penetrate deeply into our hearts. Until our next meeting, I encourage you to meditate on the parables we've studied today. Reflect on how you're using the talents God has entrusted to you. Examine your spiritual preparation in light of the parable of the 10 virgins. Consider how you're responding to God's generous invitation in your life. Ask yourself these questions. Am I a faithful servant, multiplying what God has entrusted to me? Am I spiritually ready, my lamp filled with oil for times of trial and for the Lord's return? Have I truly grasped the value of God's invitation, or am I letting other priorities take over? May the grace and peace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Master Storyteller, be with you. May you continue to grow in understanding and practice of His teachings, thus becoming an ever more faithful reflection of His kingdom in our world. See you soon for the conclusion of our fascinating exploration of Jesus' parables in the Gospel of Matthew.